Not quite there yet. The big red falls to the big blue. Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and this is episode 12 of the Cobsmacked Podcast. This is a Nebraska Football podcast where we cover the Husker season and team news as it progresses throughout the year. Every video episode is uploaded to YouTube, and the audio versions can be found on Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you enjoy the content, please consider leaving a like and following wherever you're listening. It helps me grow the podcast and helps me reach more ears. Getting into this week's recap, we have the Week 6 matchup against the Michigan Wolverines. The final score was 29-32 Michigan. Before we get into any of the game stats, I want to first speak to Teddy Prohaska is likely out for the season after tearing his ACL, MCL, and meniscus, it appears. Somebody had seen that on Facebook through his mom. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but I'm sure we'll hear from Scott Frost today at the Monday press conference about more on that. But the thoughts go out to him for a speedy recovery. I was really up on Teddy this year coming in, the way that he was playing, the way that he was fighting for playing time, and the way that he was effective on the offensive line as his first year here. So thoughts go out to him on a speedy recovery. I hope to see him back soon. Getting into the stats, though, we have Nebraska had 291 passing yards to 140 on the ground. Michigan had 255 passing yards with 204 on the ground. That ends, the totals are 431 for Nebraska and 459 for Michigan. That's quite a bit more offense than I thought I was going to see. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that was also on, we had 60 total offensive snaps. They had 81. Watching the game live, I didn't see that big of a discrepancy on, it didn't feel like they had it that much more than we did. They had it for almost 10 minutes more than we did as well, but I didn't feel that way watching it live. But then watching it back, going through the stats and things, like they did have more sustained drives, more short yardage gains, that they just kept the ball moving. So they did get more snaps off, which I think that ended up playing a role later in the game on our defense. Looking at the defenses, our Black Shirts came up with 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 interception. Michigan's had 1 sack, 4 tackles for loss, and 1 interception as well. Special teams, we did not attempt a field goal, but we did have 4 punts for an average of 47.5 yards. They had 4 of 4 for field goals. Their field goal kicker was really good, as he has been all year. He's only missed 1 all year, so that wasn't surprising, but still 4 for 4 on field goals is impressive. They also kicked 4 punts for 50.8 average yards per punt. Looking at the first downs, we had 19 to their 26. We had the ball for 25.5 minutes. They had it for 34.5 minutes. And the penalties. So we had 6 penalties for 47 yards, and they had 6 for 55 yards. We are definitely going to get into that later on. I'm sure if you've watched the game, you're expecting some comments on the officiating, but we will surely get to that later. Stepping into the offense. So we were shut out in the first half. We did not score anything in the first half. It did not seem, outside of maybe the first drive, that we could get anything going. And maybe that had something to do with it. We went down the field on the first drive, and we got down to the 2-yard line, and we went for it on 3rd down, couldn't get it in, went for it on 4th down, and couldn't get it in instead of kicking the field goal. That's up for debate, whether you think we should have kicked the field goal and gotten the points or taken the touchdown. Scott Frost mentioned after the game that he didn't think we were going to win this game with field goals. And I respected the decision. It was early in the game. We were there. We should have punched it in. I do think that we should have probably brought Yant in for that short yardage gain. It's 2 yards. He can punch that in like a bowling ball. There was issues outside of that, though, that we're going to get into later. But I just feel like that could have changed the momentum of the game right there, right off the bat. So I respect the decision to go for the touchdown there. We did struggle on 3rd downs during the game. We only went 3 for 11 on 3rd downs. We only had 5 rushing first downs, and 3 of those came from Adrian Martinez, and 2 of those came in the second half. So the first half was just all around bad for the offense, but then we came out in the 3rd quarter and we scored 22 points. So we made some adjustments at halftime. I kind of mentioned this last week that there isn't really time for adjustments in the locker room during halftime. It's more of a refocusing. So whatever it was that happened in the locker room, whatever focus that we realigned ourselves with, we came out and scored 22 points in the 3rd quarter, and that was impressive going up against Michigan's defense. I was worried about the offensive line in this game. If you watch the preview, if you watch any of the previews this year, I'm always worried about the offensive line being able to protect the quarterback and create running lanes. They actually performed admirably. I wasn't too down on the offensive line this game, considering the competition they went up against. I mentioned Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo coming in and being difficult to maintain the pocket, difficult to create running lanes when those guys are constantly in your face. Ojabo did come up with their only sack, but Aiden Hutchinson, although he was after Adrian all the time right away, he did not get a sack. They only had the 4 tackles for loss. So I think comparatively against that defense and our young offensive line, that we played very well. As I mentioned, Teddy Prohaska went out with an injury. Bryce Benhart came in, and I'm not the only one, but I have been hard on Bryce and Ethan Piper as well. Those two specifically have been kind of, because they were getting a lot of penalties and they weren't holding their guy well. But he came in after Teddy went down, and to his credit, he played very well. He had the highest overall grade on the offensive line, and he had the best run block on the offensive line as well. That's impressive to come in a scenario where we're not expecting to play a ton of snaps, and to also come in a situation where you lost your job because you weren't performing well. But then to come in and perform the best on the line, that's credit to Bryce Benhart. He played a good game. It did seem like the defense targeted Turner Cochran quite a bit. I don't know if that's because they kept flipping Aiden Hutchinson onto that side, but he scored another 0 for his passing grade and a 24.8 overall. So Turner had a hard game, hard time playing his position on Saturday. But again, freshman. You have to look at this from a perspective of our offensive line is young guys. But they only give up 1 sack. Adrian was under pressure for 33% of his drop back. So like I said, considering the competition, the offensive line played admirably. Looking at Adrian Martinez, he had a mixed bag, as he usually does. Twitter has not been kind to him, or Scott Frost for that matter. But Twitter seems to always kind of flip this way. Either he's the savior, he's the Heisman contender, or he should be off the team. He needs to be benched. They need to bring in a backup, something like that. I haven't seen so much of that this year, that he needs to be benched or there's a backup, but it's just been a lot of hate on Adrian, and I don't understand it. He did have an interception that came off a tipped pass to Austin Allen early in the second quarter. And then the one that he's been getting dragged for the most has been his fumble with 1:45 left in the game. He was kind of stood up and they stripped it. After the game, he said there was no excuses. He's not going to stand up here and make excuses for himself, but he thought the play was over. And I mean, if you listen to any of the commentators and stuff, they also think that the play should have probably been blown dead. Me watching it live, watching the replays live, I did not think, I didn't think that the play was over. He was still kind of pushing forward. He was stood up, so that was a thing. But I don't know. He took it really hard. You could see him when he went to the sideline and watching the replay up there that he took it hard, because in that moment you feel like you let the team down. And it's not the first time that he's felt this way, but eventually it's going to stack up. And I think this one got to him. You could tell that it really hit him deeply. But he had a solid game outside of that, especially a solid second half. So overall in the game, he went 18 for 28 for 291 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns passing, and 1 rushing touchdown on top of that. He had the 1 interception, but he went for 300 total yards himself. That's what you expect from Adrian, especially against a defense that we got told we weren't going to move the ball on Michigan, and we come out and in the second half we score 29 points. That's after getting shut out in the first half. Had we been able to get this kick started from the beginning, had we been able to punch that touchdown in the first drive of the game, that just completely changes the narrative here. Second half specifically, this is a Parker Gabriel tweet. I didn't think about it before that, but Parker Gabriel tweeted out that Adrian went 11 for 12 and 172 yards in the second half. He had 32 rushing yards, and then all of the touchdowns came in the second half. All 3 of his passing touchdowns came in the third quarter alone. They also went for a 2-point conversion, and they converted on that as well. He had a big day, and it was just the one crucial moment that he's getting a lot of the blame for the loss, when we had lots of moments throughout the game that we could have changed the tide of things. And so I don't ever like it when one player gets a lot of the blame for the loss. It happened earlier in the year with Connor Culp. It's a team sport. You have to look at it from that perspective. Looking at the running back, so Ramir Johnson had a big day. He had 17 carries for 67 yards, but more impressively, he had 6 receptions for 105 yards with 1 touchdown. He had a 43-yard long reception. He was the top Yeah, he was the top receiver on the team on Saturday. He had a big day, and they used him a lot in that scenario, the wheel routes and things like that. I liked that. He was utilized effectively against a Michigan defense that was hard to get yards otherwise. Jacques Yant came in, as I mentioned earlier. I would have liked to see him on that 2-yard line early in the game, but he was missed on those short yardage. He went 4 carries for 14 yards total. And then after the game, we found out that he was benched for running the wrong way on a 3rd down. It was a 3rd down. I think it was 2 or 3 yards he needed to get, and he ran the wrong way from the protection that he had. And so we were forced to punt there. He got benched. I would have liked to had him go into the locker room or at the end of the quarter or whatever and got sat down and been like, you can't have this. But that makes me think that there's more issues there that we don't know about as far as his playbook knowledge. Adrian kind of made a comment about that last week after he had his big breakout game, that he had some troubles with the weight. He got the weight down. He's kind of had some trouble with the playbook as well. So there must be more there to it, that he got benched for running the wrong way when he should have known that assignment. We don't know the full details, but he was surely missed on the short yardage gains that we needed. The last drive of the game as well, before Adrian even had to run for that 1st down, we kind of got in a pile up pushing towards the line. Had we had a bigger back, or had we had a bigger veteran offensive line, we saw Michigan do it kind of all night. They would get in a pile up, and then the line would push them forward. Had we had a bigger back or had bigger linemen, we could have done the same thing there, and Adrian wouldn't have had to run on that fumble drive anyway. But the receiving core, looking at them as well, they kind of struggled as well. It was kind of feast or famine as far as offense goes. So the tight end and the running back room had big days. Adrian had a big day. The receiving core kind of struggled, which I thought that the receiving core was going to have a bigger night. I mentioned that the cornerbacks hadn't really been tested coming into this game, so I thought that we were going to be able to test them on the outside with the corners. They combined only had 10 receptions for 63 yards. There was 4 different receivers that caught passes, but combined 10 receptions for 63 yards is not what I expected from the receiving core. We had Toure, we have Oliver Martin, we had everybody available, but they just weren't getting separation. Watching it back, they weren't getting open. They weren't getting the separation to give Adrian the place to throw the ball. And that might be a credit to Michigan's defense. Maybe the corners were more solid than I thought they were. The whole defense as a whole, I kind of was saying that I thought that they were a little softer than they had appeared. The defense played well. The defense played good. Michigan as a whole played good. The offense played really well as well. But like I mentioned, the top 2 receivers were Ramir Johnson and Austin Allen. Those were the top 2 receivers, and one's a running back, one's a tight end. I don't have so much trouble with that. I like scheming in the tight ends and the running backs off of wheel routes or off of these short passes when there's room underneath. But I still expected a lot more from the receiving room, more than 63 yards worth anyway. Now we're going to flip over to the defense. Deontay Williams picked off Cade McNamara for the first time this season. That was something I wanted to see. Obviously, I mean, you want to see your team succeed. But Deontay Williams picked off Cade McNamara for the first time. The black shirts, specifically Ty Robinson, got the sack on McNamara for the first time this season. I had mentioned that they'd given up 1 sack to the backup, but McNamara hadn't been sacked or hit a whole lot this season. And he was under pressure quite a bit on Saturday. The linebackers accounted for half of the team's tackles. Nick Henrich had a career high for 15 tackles. Luke Reimer had 12 tackles, including 1 big tackle for loss. But the linebackers did struggle with pass coverage. So they had 15 targets in that linebacker zone area that went for 12 catches and 103 yards out of their 255 total passing yards. So almost half of their passing yards came from those short yard gains where the linebackers are supposed to be covering that. The secondary also had, kind of a mixed bag there. Cam Taylor-Britt had 11 tackles and 3 pass breakups. He was targeted the most out of any cornerback at 8, but he only allowed 2 completions for 14 yards. He had probably the best game that he's had this year. With him coming back and Joe Jodoman coming back and Ben Stilley coming back, you were hoping that these guys were going to have a big game to up their draft stock. And Cam Taylor-Britt finally had a game where you look at him and he played great defense. You would have liked to see him have a pick. He almost did, but I was happy for him that he came in and he finally had some success where he's been struggling otherwise this year. Deontay Williams had the lone interception, but otherwise he struggled in coverage. He had the team high 5 missed tackles. He allowed 5 of the 7 targets for catches and 122 yards on him. So he had the big play, yes, but outside of the big play, he wasn't consistent. He was giving up bigger plays, and he just wasn't making the tackles when he needed to. So defense overall, I mentioned that the offenses were able to move the ball more than I thought they were going to, and that's a credit to Michigan as well. Cade McNamara, I didn't think he was a good quarterback, but he was making some tough passes, and the running backs were able to run. I think a lot of this, too, came down to the second half. The defenses were getting tired. I mentioned that they ran 81 plays, and a lot of those were run plays. They ran it 42 times against the line, and eventually you're going to get worn down, and I think that's kind of what happened. Looking at the special teams, William Prestup came in and he punted well. So it's nice to see him. He had the one punt last week that went 84 yards or whatever that was. And then this week he had the 4 for 47.5 average yards. So it seems like we've kind of gotten that wrinkle ironed out. It might have just been one game where we just had horrendous special teams on punting. But it's nice to see him come in. We did not attempt any field goals, as I mentioned, and we fair caught all of the returns that we got. We never had anybody attempt to bring one back. Oliver Martin was back there for the fair catches again, and he did well outside of one that he downed on the 6-yard line, which he could have let that one roll into the end zone. But otherwise, special teams didn't hurt us necessarily. So that was nice to see. We didn't have any one area that hurt us on the team, and we'll get into that a little bit later, how that impacted the game. Overall, I think that this is a Big Ten game through and through. Both teams played well. The defenses created a lot of pressure. Everything was hard fought. There was no easy yardage, but the offenses did have more success than I thought they were going to. More so as the game went on, as I mentioned, but this was the most points that Michigan has given up all year on defense, and all of those were in the second half. As I mentioned, we could have upped that a little bit more had we been able to sustain drives in the first half. This is also the most points that was put up on the black shirts this year as well. So both offenses had success when most people thought this was going to be a low-scoring affair. The over and under was 50 in this game, and they went over that, obviously. I think the season might be catching up with us as well. This is a side note that I had, was that the defense has now been out there for, even early in the game, early in the year, when we're looking at how many snaps the defense was taking. This is 7 games in a row now without a bye week. And we have one more yet to go before we get to a bye week. We have to go to Minnesota next. That's a long time without a break for defense to kind of recover. But I know that they don't like that excuse. The Jojo Doman has specifically said it. I think Luke Reimer has said it, that it doesn't matter how long you've been playing. Specifically, I think they were more talking a snap count, but I think it's still the same thing applies for just how many games you've played in a row. They don't like using the excuse of you're tired or you're beat down or whatever. You need to go out there and you need to do your job. And so I think that as much as I can sit here and think that that's a lot of football to be played without taking a break, they're not going to use that as an excuse. Looking over to Husker Twitter. So when I do spend time with Husker fans, when I want to go interact with Husker fans, it's usually on Twitter. That's just my social media of choice as far as Husker fandom goes. There's been a lot of conspiracy theories floating around and a lot of rumors floating around as far as like Kevin Warren plotting against Nebraska or the officials being from Michigan and being biased or etc. So this is where I want to get into the officiating because it was bad. But I don't think that there was any malicious intent or anything like that. I think that this was just another case of bad officiating. This happens all across college football. We can, as Big Ten fans, really shit on Big Ten officials because they are bad consistently all the time. But this happens all over. This happens in every conference. There's bad calls. There's bad games. It's been kind of a thing that's been growing over the last few years where officiating has consistently gotten more worse. There's always been bad calls in football. Always. For as long as any fan's been a fan of football, there's been bad calls. But it seems like it's getting more consistent to the point where it's starting to affect not just a play, not just a series, but the outcomes of games. And I don't like that. We kind of talked about this earlier in the year also. But I'm pretty sure it was Jeremiah Searles had made a comment on the radio during the game that the officials should err on the side of missed calls over bad ones. That's kind of how they wanted to operate. But in this game, there was just a lot of bad calls. and it's not all on Nebraska either. I'm not going to sit here and say that Nebraska was the only one harmed by the bad officiating, but I think that the officiating stole the magic from this matchup for me. This was two great teams, two historically great teams playing against each other in a cathedral of college football at Memorial Stadium, and just the energy there. This was a magical experience, and the officiating stole some of that for me. The players have to deal with it. The fans have to deal with it. But I think more so the players have to deal with the frustration of it because they're attempting to play football and they're getting stuff brought back. They're getting officiating is getting in the way. Michigan or Nebraska, both of them had to deal with frustrations. There was 3 straight overturned calls on the field in the second quarter. I think all 3 of the overturned calls kind of went Michigan's way initially. There was 2 Michigan touchdowns that got brought back and then a Martinez fumble that was ruled down. But Michigan had its fair share as well. Harbaugh had to challenge a first down run. Watching it live, I thought that the runner made the first down, and they placed the ball 3 yards short of the first down marker. And I even thought that was odd. My brother was like, "Well, if they want to put it there, put it there." But I was like, "No," because then that's you want to win against a good football team because you beat them, not because the officials screwed something up. So he challenged it, and they ruled it. That he did make it, in fact. So I don't know how you can be off by 9 feet. He made a comment like that as well in the post game. How can you be off 9 feet from where the ball goes out to where you think the ball goes out? But looking at Nebraska's size, there were some that were just not excusable. That being one of them, the first down run was inexcusable. But these 2 kind of really impacted the game itself. JoJo Domann was called for a defensive pass interference with 20 seconds left in the second quarter. The call itself was terrible. The ball was like 15 or 20 yards over the guy's head, the receiver. The receiver had given up on the play. The ball was nowhere close to him. He couldn't have caught it. Even if JoJo was nowhere around, the guy could not have gotten to the ball. I'm pretty sure it went out of bounds. I'm pretty sure it didn't even land in bounds. It went way over his head. It sailed. But he ran into JoJo, and JoJo ran into him, and they called him for pass interference. The call itself was downright terrible, but the placement of the ball was also very confusing. They placed the ball on the 3-yard line, and nobody can give me a good explanation for that. If it was a half the distance to the goal, it should have been down on the 7.5-yard line because the line of scrimmage was on the 15. If it was a spot foul, it should have been down on the 6 or the 5-yard line. I don't know how they got to the 3-yard line because then they just punched it in the next play. They took it in with Haskins. That was probably the one that affected the game the most. They would have had to kick a field goal probably otherwise. I don't imagine that they would try to go out without any points on that drive before halftime, knowing that we get the ball back. So that changed it from a 9-point game, a 9-point lead going into halftime to a 13-point lead going into halftime. It's 4 points, but it's something. It's something that kind of took the wind out of the sails for the black shirts. Luke Reimers also got called later on for disconcerting signals. It was a delay of game, disconcerting signals for clapping his hands at his linebacker. I think he was trying to get the attention of like Kalervik or Heinrich. Someone, he was like, "Hey, listen," because the guy wasn't looking at him. He was like, "Hey, listen," clapping his hands. And they called him for imitating the snap count, essentially. Nebraska has dealt with both sides of this. I don't like that you can tell a defensive player not to clap his hands. But then on our side of that, we've dealt with that in the past. And it wasn't just the defense. It was people on the sidelines clapping their hands, trying to get Adrian to take the ball early or to affect the snap or whatever. And Cam Jurgens early on dealt with that a lot because he was new at being a center. He heard claps, he'd snap the ball, and Adrian wouldn't be ready for it. That happened multiple times. And I remember specifically Iowa and Wisconsin. Wisconsin's sideline was doing it, and Iowa, I believe, was also doing it. But we would throw Scott Frost would get mad at the officials saying, how can you allow that to happen? Like this, they're just screwing up the whole game. Iowa's head coach said something along the lines of "stop crying about it," something like that. I don't remember the exact quote, but this has happened to us repeatedly in the past, and it's never been dealt with. And now we get flagged for it, and it wasn't even intentional. He wasn't sitting there trying to get the center to snap the ball or trying to get the lineman to move. He was trying to get his teammates' attention. The very next play, he does the same thing because that's just a thing you do. When the crowd is loud, they're not going to hear your voice. So you clap to try to get their attention. You try to wave your hands or whatever. he did the exact same thing, and the other defensive players were like, no, don't do that because you're going to get flagged for it again. I don't like that. I don't like that the offense gets all of the power as far as sound goes on the field. If they're going to make that a rule where you can't imitate the snap or whatever, then they need to have some kind of consistency as far as what you're allowed to do and what you're allowed not to do. You can't just have the gray area of disconcerting signals. What if a team, who was this? Nick Ba had the podcast where he has Bo Root on and they talk about this. He said that what if you had a teammate named Hut and you went Hut and they hiked the ball? No, I was just talking to my teammate. His name's Hut. Like something like that. They need to have not a gray area with that kind of penalty because that's going to be abused. I've never heard that penalty before. Another penalty we're not used to hearing was the joint possession on a Michigan muffed punt. We had kicked a punt, Michigan muffed the punt, and a pileup ensued. They didn't even finish pulling the pile off, and they called joint possession and that Michigan gets the ball because they're the receiving team. That specific rule, the joint possession, is typically one you see with wide receivers. If you throw like a jump ball to a wide receiver and the wide receiver and the cornerback both come down with the ball and they both have equal possession of the ball, you say that the receiving team gets the edge there and they get the joint possession. So then they would get the touchdown or the first down or whatever the case may be. During a punt, if they muff a punt, they are not they didn't have possession of the ball to begin with. So it's a live ball. It should be treated as a fumble. They didn't even I don't know. I don't like that call. I didn't like that they didn't try to see who had the ball actually. They just called a joint possession and Michigan got the ball there. We would have had the ball within the 10-yard line. I believe it was on the 6 maybe. I don't there's just a lot of things. I don't want to sit here and blame the game on the officiating, blame the game on there, but you do need to have accountability as far as officiating goes. The game went the way it went. That's fine. We can deal with that. This can also be dealt with as far as I'm sure that the Big Ten is going to hear a lot of complaints from both teams today on Monday. But this happens all across college football, as I mentioned. They keep making comments that the NCAA just needs to have NCAA officials, not conference-based officials. And maybe that would help. Maybe having a universal training system would help. Because I don't think that there was bias here. Again, I think this was just bad officiating. I think that there was calls made when they shouldn't have been made and other calls that were missed when they should have been called. But you got to be more consistent. There's got to be some consistency there. The officials got in the way of an otherwise great game. Like I mentioned, two great historical teams playing in a great theater of football, and they kind of stole that. They ruined the game from that perspective. What does this loss mean? So Saturday night, much like the Michigan State game, I felt crushed for the team and the coaching staff. If you watched the Michigan State recap, it was very similar to that. It was such a high energy, positive feeling towards the end of the game. Frost said it himself after the game. He said, tonight felt like the night. Felt like we were going to go out there. Up until the Adrian fumble, it felt good. We got the ball back with 2 minutes left, 1:40 left, whatever it was. And you felt like we were going to go down there and score and win the game. Like you did not have this, what's going to go wrong now? Are we going to throw an interception or a fumble or what's going to go wrong now? Or at least I did not have that feel. I didn't have that feeling, and I have had that in the past where you just feel like something is bound to happen because it always does. I didn't feel that this drive. We got the ball back. I was like, we're going to go down and score, and we're going to win this game. Like, that's a great feeling to have. And then you flip that after the fumble. You flip that to feeling drained and you feeling tired and you feeling like, I don't want to see this again, but you have to. I went to bed not sure exactly how to feel about that on Saturday night. I woke up on Sunday morning and I laid there for a long time, replaying moments in the game, replaying things that happened in the game, trying to figure out what could have changed to make the outcome different. Obviously, the officiating plays into that a little bit, but game-wise, what did the game mean to me? How did I feel about the game? And I still wasn't sure. It wasn't until I started going back and watching the game, watching the highlights, watching the game back in full, going through the stats, things like that, that I started to get a better rounded approach to the game itself. I did not feel good about the team. The gut reaction. I did not feel good about how the team performed. Going back and watching it and seeing how they actually played, not being emotionally tied to it, like I was on Saturday. We played a good game. I hate losing. The team hates losing, and it hurts. But that's the thing. It's not a good feeling, but you hate losing again. It's no longer expected. It's no longer the norm. We got to a point as Huskers, as fans, you hated losing, but you were just kind of used to it. Like, we lost again. We hate it now. Like, this was another one-score game. You didn't feel like you were down and out of it. You didn't feel like you got blown out. You felt like the expectation now is to win the game. You should have. Michigan State should have won the game. Oklahoma could have won that game. But that's the expectation now. The expectation is to win. The expectation is no longer to just don't mess it up. We lost the game. That's the expectation. Like, what do you expect? It's the Huskers. And I love that. I hate losing. I hate the feeling of losing, but I love the fact that the expectation is flipped. And that, for me, was the thing that I found out watching the game back, is that going into that final drive, before Adrian fumbled, I didn't expect us to mess it up. I expected us to win the game. And I enjoy that. It hurts now, and I enjoy the hurt. So, watching the game for what it was, officiating aside, this was a lot of measuring stick moments in the game. So we didn't shoot ourselves in the foot. I didn't think so. We had penalties, yes, but we didn't shoot ourselves in the foot. We didn't beat ourselves. We didn't get pushed around. That was the big measuring stick that I mentioned in the preview, was that 2018 Michigan game. We got pushed around as a program, and it looked terrible. How far have we come? We didn't get pushed around, with the exception of the defensive line getting pushed a little bit with our young offensive line, but that's not a effort thing. That's not a size thing anymore. That's just an experience thing. We played well. We played well-rounded three-phases game of big boy football against a big boy team, and we never quit. That's been something I've enjoyed seeing throughout the first all the games up past Illinois. I've enjoyed seeing a fight that never quit. Even in the Illinois game, you can say we didn't quit. We still played the game. We tried to make a comeback there. We didn't roll over at any point this season, and that's something I've enjoyed seeing. This was a good loss against a top 10 team yet again. No loss feels good. As I mentioned, you don't want to lose, but the meaningful ones make a difference. You don't want to lose a game where you go away feeling hopeless. But we want to play good football against good teams, and that's what we got. We played a good team, and you can't, even if we were, Alabama lost a game against Texas A&M this weekend. Alabama's the best team probably in the past decade. They've just been a powerhouse, and they lost to Texas A&M, who many people thought was just done with this year. Good teams play good football, but they're not going to beat every good team they play, because there's going to be nights where the other team just plays better. That was one of the cases tonight Saturday with Michigan. We played a good game of football. They played a good game of football. They just barely won. Play that game 10 times, it's probably 5-5. But Alabama losing to A&M is a good thing. You look at that, and any good team in college football can beat any good team in college football. That's why college football is so great. There's never knowing what exactly is going to happen. The ball's going to flip either way. That's the funny thing about that funny-shaped ball. It's going to roll either way. You never know. And so that's what makes college football great. Looking forward, we have a game. We have to travel to a 3-2 Minnesota team. We have a bye week after that. Then we have Purdue and Ohio State, then another bye week. Then we travel again to Wisconsin, and we have Iowa at home. We need 3 of these 5 games to win to get to a bowl game. Minnesota and Purdue should be wins. Minnesota's been down. Purdue's been down. Should be wins. So there's 5 there. Then we need to beat one of the Ohio State, Wisconsin's, or Iowa's left on the schedule. Ohio State and Iowa are both top 10 teams. I'm going to reference a tweet here. I mentioned that we have had 5 top 10 teams on our schedule this year. Oklahoma, Michigan State, and Michigan, we have lost by a combined 13 points, and one of those came in overtime. We still have to play Ohio State and Iowa, and they're still in the top 5, or those 5 are in the top 10 this season. They could be up higher than that. Iowa is number 2. Ohio State could get up to number 4 by the time we play them as well. But we play both of those teams at home. We play Ohio State and Iowa at home. I don't know. I feel like with 5 games left in the season, there's a lot of confidence to be had moving forward. I don't feel like you should be down with this Huskers program. Yes, time's running out. You get that feeling of urgency now. But if we can beat Minnesota and then Purdue and then win against a weakened Wisconsin team, they still have a really good defense, or Ohio State, that would be the ideal scenario, that you win Minnesota, Purdue, either Wisconsin or Ohio State. And then you go into the Iowa game, already having your bowl game locked up. Iowa could still potentially be undefeated at that point. You go into the Iowa game knowing you have the goal that you set for the season being the bowl game. You have that already locked up. So now you just have to play for respect against an undefeated Iowa team whose offense has been complete dog water. But I said dog water. My kid says dog water around the house now. Now I said dog water. I don't even exactly know what that means. Anyways, Iowa's defense has been downright terrible, but their defense has been so astronomically good. I thought it was fluky how they beat Maryland. They went out and did the same thing against Penn State. I don't think it's fluky. They're good. I'm not sure how much that's luck, how much that's just that they are in the right places at the right time, but Iowa's defense is holding them up there. I feel like if we go into that game playing good defense and getting some things figured out on offense, getting the offensive line ready for that game, that we would have a good chance at knocking off Iowa. And that would just feel so good after so long of losing to them. So I want to see us win 6 games going into the Iowa game, get that locked up, get the bowl game locked up, and then play Iowa. So I'm slightly worried that the close losses are going to start taking a toll on the player's psyche, but from whatever I'm seeing, like report-wise, listening to the interviews and stuff, it doesn't sound like it. Sounds like it hurt on Saturday, but that they are getting the ball moving. They still have this goal in mind, so they're going to get there. The one I worry about the most was Martinez. His interview still seemed like he was still down about it. He took the loss hard. He took the fumble hard. But he needs to shake it and continue football. He's been playing outstanding this year. He's been playing really well this year. And he just needs to focus on the fact that he's still the playmaker that the team needs. He's still the leader on the team. And that fans love watching him. The true fans love watching him. College football fans love watching him. And, I mean, football is football. Things are going to happen. But that's going to wrap up this week's recap. We will be back here on Wednesday for another pregame analysis going into the Minnesota game. If you have any comments, if you liked anything I said here, if you feel different about the officiating, let me know how you feel about the officiating. Do you feel like Nebraska fans or just fans in general rag on officiating too much and kind of put too much of the loss or win, for that matter, on officiating and how bad the officiating is? Or do you think that it's a legitimate concern across college football that the officials are messing up great games? Find me on Twitter at Cobsmacked Pod or leave comments below on this YouTube video. Otherwise, until next time, go Big Red.